alone with my boss's wife at the lake. One night changed everything. By the time my boss's wife looked at me across the dark lake and said, "Do not tell him you held me," I already knew my life was about to change. Not the kind of trouble that shows up in meetings or costs you a promotion. Not the kind people whisper about near the coffee machine. This was deeper than that. It felt like something had shifted inside my chest. Like a quiet door had opened and there was no way to close it again. My name is Ethan Cole. I am 27 years old and I live alone in a small apartment in Boston's Back Bay. The rent takes more than it should. The walls are thin. I know too much about my neighbors, fights, and their late-night phone calls. From my window, I can see a small stretch of the Charles River. On good days, the view almost makes the price worth it. Almost. I work as a financial analyst at an investment firm downtown. My days are filled with numbers, spreadsheets, long meetings, and serious faces. The job looks impressive. It pays well. My parents are proud when they talk about it, but it is not the life I once imagined. When I was younger, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to tell stories that made people feel something real, stories that stayed with you after you closed the book. Somewhere along the way, I chose stability instead of risk. I told myself it was the smart decision, safe, responsible. An ex once told me I was like a closed book, easy to look at, hard to understand. She left. I did not try to stop her. Every year, the firm plans a team retreat. They call it bonding. I call it forced fun. That October, they sent us to a lakeside resort in western Massachusetts. 3 days of cabins, group games, and smiling for photos. Skipping was not an option. My boss, David Hartwell, made that clear. David is 47, vice president of the firm. Calm, polished, always in control. He can win over a client in minutes and shut down an argument with one sentence. He is not cruel, just sharp. The kind of man who never seems unsure. His wife came to the retreat too, Melissa Hartwell. I had seen her before at office events, holiday parties, charity dinners. She usually stood beside David, holding a glass of wine, smiling softly. Blonde hair just above her shoulders, brown eyes that looked kind but distant at the same time. I had never spoken to her for more than a few seconds. Until that night. The first day at the resort was loud and busy. People checked into cabins, laughed too hard, drank too much. The lake was still and beautiful, framed by trees with golden leaves. It looked like something from a postcard. I dropped my bag in my cabin and felt the familiar urge to be alone. I skipped the big dinner and said I had a headache. Instead, I took a book and sat on the small porch outside my cabin. The air smelled like pine and cold water. I could hear music and laughter drifting from the main lodge. I was halfway through a chapter when I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then I heard it again. A soft sound. Broken. Someone crying. It came from the direction of the lake. I froze. My first instinct was to stay where I was. It was not my business. People cry for reasons that have nothing to do with you. I could go back to my book and pretend I never heard anything. But something about the sound would not let me. I put the book down, grabbed my jacket, and walked toward the water. The gravel crunched under my boots. The closer I got, the colder the air felt. The lake was dark and still, reflecting distant cabin lights like scattered stars. At the end of the wooden dock, someone sat with their knees pulled close to their chest. As I stepped closer, the light caught her hair. Blonde, loose, falling over an oversized sweater. Melissa. She did not see me at first. Her face was buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook quietly. I stopped a few feet away. I could still turn around. She would never know I had been there. Instead, I spoke. Melissa. She looked up fast. Her eyes were red, wet. For a second, she looked embarrassed, exposed. Ethan, she said, wiping her cheeks quickly, I did not think anyone was out here. I was on my porch, I said. I heard you. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. She let out a short laugh that did not sound happy. I am not, she said. The wind moved across the water, sharp and cold. I sat down on the dock, leaving space between us. My feet hung over the edge. You do not have to talk, I said. If you want me to go, I will. She studied my face for a moment. "You look like someone who would rather read than sing by a fire," she said quietly. I smiled faintly. That is accurate. Something about that made her relax just a little. For a while we sat in silence. Then she spoke again. "I used to be an architect," she said, staring at the lake. "I designed buildings. I had my name in magazines. I knew who I was." Her fingers twisted the edge of her sweater. "Then I met David. I thought we were building something together. So I stepped back. I quit my job. I followed him. I smiled. I supported him. Somewhere along the way, I disappeared." Her words hit harder than I expected. I thought about the stories I never wrote, the dreams I folded away because they were not practical. "You are not invisible," I said softly. "Not right now." She looked at me carefully. "You do not have to be kind." "I am not," I said. "I am telling the truth." The silence between us changed. It felt warmer. When she shivered, trying to hide it, I took off my jacket and placed it around her shoulders. Our hands brushed. The contact was brief, but it felt like something more. "Thank you," she whispered. The lake stayed quiet. The night grew colder. Without thinking, she leaned slightly closer to block the wind. I could feel the warmth of her shoulder against my arm. Neither of us moved away. After a long moment, she spoke again, her voice barely louder than the water. "Ethan," she said slowly, "do not tell him you held me." And in that instant, sitting on a wooden dock under a cold October sky, I knew this was no longer just a quiet conversation by the lake. It was the beginning of something that would change everything. The next morning felt wrong. For a few seconds after I opened my eyes, I forgot where I was. I stared at the wooden ceiling of the cabin and listened to people walking outside. Doors closing, someone laughing too loudly. Then it all came back at once. The dock. The cold water. Melissa leaning into me. Her voice in the dark, telling me not to tell him I held her. My chest tightened. I sat up slowly and rubbed my face, hoping the night would feel smaller in daylight. It did not. If anything, it felt heavier. By the time I walked toward the main lodge for breakfast, the resort was alive. The smell of coffee filled the air. Plates clinked. People talked about kayaking and group games like nothing serious had happened. I told myself not to look for her. I looked anyway. Melissa sat beside David at one of the long tables in the center of the room. She looked calm, composed. Her hair was smooth, her posture straight. If I had not been there the night before, I would have believed she was fine. David was in the middle of a story, moving his hands as he spoke. Two senior partners laughed at something he said. He looked confident. In control. The same man who signed my performance reviews. Melissa glanced up. Our eyes met across the room. For a second, everything else faded. The noise, the movement, the smell of coffee. There was only that quiet awareness between us. Not panic, not regret, awareness. Then she looked away and lifted her cup like nothing had happened. I took a seat at the far end of the table and focused on my plate. The food tasted like nothing. My hands felt unsteady. I wondered if it showed. The rest of the day filled itself with workshops and team exercises, trust games, problem-solving challenges, people pairing up and pretending to enjoy it. I followed instructions. I answered when spoken to. I kept my thoughts locked tight. Melissa stayed close to David all day. She smiled at the right moments. She played her role perfectly. If she felt what I felt, she hit it well. Once during a break, I stepped outside for air. Through a large window, I saw her standing alone for a moment, staring toward the lake. Her expression was distant. Then David walked up behind her and rested his hand on her shoulder. Casual, familiar. I turned away before she could see me watching. That night was the final night of the retreat. A bonfire by the lake, music, drinks, marshmallows, photos for the company website. People talked about bonding and memories. I stayed long enough to be seen, long enough not to raise questions. Then I slipped away. The path to the lake was darker than the night before. Clouds covered the moon. The air felt damp and sharp. I told myself I just needed quiet. The dock creaked under my boots as I walked to the end. The water was black and endless. I sat down and let my feet hang over the edge, breathing slowly. Footsteps sounded behind me. "Ethan!" Her voice was low, careful. I turned. Melissa stood a few feet away, wrapped in a dark sweater. Her hair was pulled back loosely, strands falling around her face. "Hey," I said. "I thought you might be here," she said. "You do not seem like the bonfire type." I let out a small breath. "That obvious?" She smiled faintly and walked closer. This time, when she sat beside me, there was less space between us. "Did he notice anything?" I asked quietly. She shook her head. "No, he is busy talking. He always is." We sat in silence for a moment, watching the water. "Thank you," she said softly, "for last night." Quote, "You do not have to thank me." "I do," she said. "You saw me when I was not trying to be seen." Something in my chest shifted again. "You okay tonight?" I asked. She hesitated. "More than yesterday, less than I pretend." I almost smiled at that. The wind picked up, colder than before. She shivered, trying not to show it. "You are freezing," I said. "I am fine," she replied, but her voice betrayed her. I took off my jacket again, this time slower. She looked at me. "Ethan, you do not have to." "I know," I said. "I want to." I draped it over her shoulders. She pulled it close. The fabric wrapped around her like it belonged there. She leaned slightly toward me. Her shoulder touched my arm. The contact sent a quiet shock through me. Her hand brushed mine. This time she did not pull away. I turned my palm upward without thinking. She looked at it for a second. Then she placed her hand in mine. Tentative at first. Then her fingers relaxed, fitting into my grip like they had been waiting. For a while, we just sat there, breathing in sync with the soft movement of the water. "Can we pretend?" she whispered. "Pretend what?" "That for a few minutes I am not his wife, and you are not his employee." My throat felt dry. "Yeah," I said quietly, "we can." She leaned closer, not rushed, not dramatic, just enough to escape the wind. I wrapped my arm around her carefully. Her head rested against my chest. I could feel her heartbeat, fast at first, then slower. The world felt small, contained, like nothing existed beyond the dock. "Do not tell him," she said again, her voice barely there. "I will not," I said. "I promise." We stayed like that longer than we should have, long enough for the cold to fade, long enough for the line between comfort and something else to blur. When she finally pulled away, the night rushed back in. The distance felt sudden. She handed me my jacket, her fingers lingering on the fabric. "Thank you," she said again. This time it sounded deeper. I watched her walk back toward the light of the bonfire. She did not look back. I stayed on the dock until the fire died down and the voices faded. The drive back to Boston the next day felt longer than usual. The highway blurred past. The radio stayed off. Back in my apartment, the walls felt closer than before. The river outside my window moved the same way it always had. Everything looked the same. I did not feel the same. Work returned to normal on the surface. Emails, meetings, deadlines. David was the same. Focused, sharp. If he sensed anything had shifted, he did not show it. Weeks passed. I thought about Melissa more than I wanted to admit. About the way she spoke about disappearing. About the way she leaned into me like she had not done that in years. I did not reach out. Then, one afternoon, an email appeared in my inbox. No subject, no name, just one line. "Thank you for seeing me." I stared at the screen for a long time. I did not reply. I did not delete it either. That weekend, I pulled an old box from under my bed. Notebooks from college. Half-finished stories. Pages filled with ideas I had once cared about. I opened one and started reading. Then I picked up a pen. I began to write. It started with a doc in October, and it did not stop. After that email, nothing looked different. But everything felt different. I kept going to work. I sat in meetings. I nodded at numbers on screens. I answered questions when David asked them. On the outside, I was the same Ethan Cole who showed up every morning with coffee in hand. Inside, something had cracked open. I started writing every night. Not because I planned to, it just happened. I would get home, drop my bag, sit by the window, and open one of my old notebooks. Sometimes I wrote about the lake. Sometimes I wrote about fear. About silence. About the kind of life you wake up inside without choosing. It felt like I had found a hidden room in myself. At work, I stayed careful. David hovered more than usual. He stopped by my desk with short questions. He studied my reports closely. Every time he stood near me, my stomach tightened. Not because I thought he knew. Because I knew something he did not. Melissa did not come to the office. She was not at any company dinners. When David mentioned her, it was neutral. Casual, like she was a detail, not a person. 3 weeks passed like that. Then one rainy Friday evening, I found myself walking through Cambridge with no clear plan. The air smelled like wet leaves and pavement. I was trying to quiet my thoughts when I passed a small bookstore on the corner. Warm light spilled from the windows. Without thinking, I went inside. A small bell chimed above the door. The store smelled like paper and dust and something comforting. I walked slowly through narrow aisles, running my fingers over book spines. Near the back, a sign caught my attention. Architecture for Beginners. Friday night class. I slowed down. Voices drifted from a half-open door nearby. Curious, I stepped closer and looked inside. Melissa stood at the front of a small room, drawing on a whiteboard. Her hair was tied back loosely. Her sleeves were pushed up. A marker moved easily in her hand. She was explaining lines and space and light, like it mattered deeply. The people sitting in front of her leaned forward, listening. She smiled. Not the polite smile I had seen at office parties, a real one. It reached her eyes. My heart skipped. She must have sensed someone at the door because she glanced up. Our eyes met. For a second, the room faded. She did not look surprised. She smiled softly and nodded, then turned back to the board and continued teaching. I stayed hidden between shelves, listening. This was not David's wife. This was a woman alive inside her own work. When the class ended, people gathered around her with questions. She leaned over their notebooks, encouraging them, pointing at their sketches. I stepped back into the aisle and pretended to browse. Ethan. Her voice came from behind me. I turned. She stood there with a faint smudge of ink on her finger. Hey, I said. I did not mean to interrupt. You did not, she said. I am glad you came. We stood there between shelves, the bookstore quiet again. I almost said no to teaching, she said. Then I thought about that night, about not hiding anymore. You look different, I said. I feel different, she answered. I told her I had started writing again. Her eyes lit up. That makes me happy, she said. I hoped you would. We did not touch. We did not talk about the doc. We did not need to. Before I left, she looked at me seriously. I do not want secrets anymore, she said. Not like that. I understood. A few days later, David asked me to step into his office. The door closed behind me. I am taking on a new project, he said, folding his hands on his desk. Long hours. High pressure. It could lead to something bigger. I want you on it. Of course, I said. Then he added, almost casually, Melissa has been restless lately. My chest tightened. She is teaching classes, he continued, taking on small design projects again. Good for her, I suppose. Sounds like it, I said carefully. He studied me for a moment. His eyes were sharp, searching for something. Then he nodded and dismissed me. That night, I went back to the bookstore. I stayed in the back again, listening to her teach. When class ended, she walked toward me. He knows, she asked quietly. About us, I said. She shook her head. About me changing. We stepped outside under the bookstore awning. Rain tapped softly above us. I am scared, she admitted. Not of him, of myself. You are allowed to change, I said. She looked at me steadily. You make it easier, she said. The space between us felt charged, not loud, not dramatic, just full. Whatever this is, she said softly, it cannot stay hidden forever. I know, I replied. She stepped closer, close enough that I could feel her warmth. Then we have to decide what it is, she said. And that was the moment I realized something important. The real danger was not getting caught. It was wanting more. Because I did. I wanted more than secret docks and quiet promises in the dark. I wanted her in daylight. I wanted her without fear. And I knew wanting that would cost us both. After that night outside the bookstore, I stopped pretending this was something small. Wanting more had already taken root. Quiet. Steady. Impossible to ignore. Melissa and I did not rush into anything reckless. If anything, we slowed down. We met in ordinary places. Coffee shops, where no one cared who we were. Long walks along the river where the city noise wrapped around us and kept our words private. We talked about everything except the one thing hanging between us. She told me about the first building she ever designed. A small public library in a town no one talked about. She said she cried the first time she saw it finished because it felt like proof that she existed. I told her about my notebooks, about the fear of wasting years doing something safe, about the quiet panic of waking up one day and realizing you had never truly lived. You were surviving, she said once, not living. At home, David stayed busy, late meetings, business trips. When Melissa spoke about him, there was no anger in her voice, just distance. One evening, as we walked along the river, she stopped. "Do you ever feel like you are standing on the edge of something?" she asked. "And you cannot tell if it is a cliff or a door." "All the time," I said. She turned to me. "I am scared of hurting him, but I am more scared of disappearing again." I did not answer right away. I knew this was not about romance anymore. It was about identity. "Staying silent can destroy you," I said carefully. She nodded. The first time we touched again after that was simple. We were sitting on a bench. She laughed and reached for my arm without thinking. Her hand stayed there. I covered it with mine. No rush, no drama, just warmth. "I should not," she whispered. "I know," I said. Neither of us moved. The breaking point came faster than I expected. One evening, she asked me to meet her at a quiet lake outside the city. Not the retreat, a different one. Closer. Honest. The water was still. The air smelled like wet leaves. "I told him I want space," she said. My heart jumped. "What did he say?" "He laughed," she said softly. Like I was joking. That hurt her more than anger would have. "I cannot live half awake anymore," she said. "I cannot keep shrinking." She stepped closer. "I need to know something," she said. "If I choose to be real, are you willing to stand in that with me, even if it costs us both?" The answer was already inside me. "Yes." Quote. She exhaled slowly, like she had been holding her breath for years. That night, I kissed her. It was not reckless, not wild. It was careful, honest. Like stepping into truth instead of crossing a line. When we pulled apart, she looked clearer than I had ever seen her. "He will find out," she said. "I know." And he did. The next morning, David called me into his office. He stood by the window when I walked in. "Close the door," he said. I did. "I am going to ask you something," he said calmly, "and I want the truth." I nodded. "Are you involved with my wife?" The question landed clean, direct. I could have lied. I did not. "Yes." The silence after that felt heavy. "How long?" he asked. "Since the retreat." He sat down slowly. For a moment, he looked older. "She told me last night," he said. "She said she feels more alive now than she has in years." Guilt and clarity twisted together inside me. "I never meant to hurt anyone," I said. He let out a quiet breath. "Intent does not change reality." He looked at me again, not as my boss, as a man. "This ends your future here," he said. "I cannot supervise someone who knows my wife the way you do." "I understand." "You will get a clean exit," he added. "A recommendation. I will not ruin you." "Thank you." I packed my desk that afternoon, quietly. No drama. A few coworkers asked questions. I gave simple answers. When I walked out of the building, the air felt different. Lighter. Melissa was waiting for me at a small park nearby. "It happened," I said. "I know," she replied. "We sat on a bench, not touching at first." "I am leaving," she said. "Not today, but soon." "You do not have to decide everything at once," I told her. "I am done living around someone else's life," she said. "That part is clear." Weeks passed. David moved out quietly. No shouting. just the slow ending of something that had been hollow for a long time. Melissa cried when she told me. Not because she wanted him back, because letting go still hurt. This time, when I held her, it was in daylight. No hiding. I found contract work to pay my rent. It was not glamorous, but it gave me space. At night, I wrote. Every single night. Melissa rented a small studio space with large windows and sunlight pouring in, drafting tables, sketches taped to the walls, her name on the door. I am building again, she said. You never stopped. I told her. You just paused. Months later, we went back to a lake, not the first one, a different one. We sat on a bench by the water, the air calm. Do you remember what I said that night? She asked. How can I forget? Do not tell him you held me, she said softly. I smiled. You kept your promise, she added. I always would have. She took my hand openly. No fear. The city moved around us. Cars, light, water. I thought about the man I had been before that October night. Safe. Quiet. Closed. Holding her that night did not destroy my life. It gave me one. Sometimes the moment you think will ruin everything is the one that finally shows you who you are. And I would choose it again.